There is a 31-second segment of helicopter audio that I am not supposed to have. I listen to it sometimes, late, when the wind is doing the thing it does against my window now. I have moved 4 times since Alaska. The wind still finds me. That is not a metaphor. I mean that I have stood in a kitchen in Arizona, in a desert where it had not rained in months, and heard the specific low-pressure hum that I only ever heard up there, the sound the air makes right before the readings stop making sense. In the recording, you can hear the rotors. You can hear the pilot, Vance, calling out elevation. You can hear me, my own voice, younger and not yet ruined, reading coordinates off the instrument panel in the flat bored tone of a man who has done this 100 times. And then, at the 19-second mark, Vance stops talking. Not trails off. Stops. Mid-word. The word was descending. He gets as far as desk, and then there is nothing from him for the rest of the clip, even though the helicopter keeps flying, even though I am still talking to him, even though at the 26-second mark I say, clearly, calmly, "Vance, you're seeing this too, right? Tell me you're seeing this too." He does not answer. What we were both looking at, 1,100 feet below us in a whiteout that the ground station insisted did not exist, was a cluster of structures. Buildings. Towers. Something that had geometry to it, dark against the snow, arranged in a pattern that the eye wanted to call deliberate. They were not on any map. They were not in any survey. The United States government had flown that exact grid 40 years running, and there was nothing there. There is nothing there now. I have checked. I have spent money I did not have to check. But for 31 seconds, on the 14th of February, they were there. And we recorded them. And then we landed, and we were debriefed, and by the next morning the flight log said the helicopter never left the pad. I want to tell you the whole thing. Start to finish. Not because I think it will help me. I don't think anything helps anymore. I just think somebody should know how it actually goes, not the way it goes in the movies, with the music and the screaming. The real way. The slow way. The way where nothing happens for so long that you stop believing anything is wrong, right up until the moment you can't believe anything else. So, here is how I ended up at Station Ardent. That is the honest version. People always want a better reason than that, something about adventure or science or running from a divorce, and there was a divorce, but it wasn't dramatic. It just ended, the way a tap runs out of pressure. After it ended I had a meteorology degree I'd barely used, a contracting resume full of 6-month gaps, and a recruiter from a subcontractor called Halden Atmospheric who called me on a Tuesday and offered me more money than I'd made in 3 years to go sit at the top of the world and write down numbers. The contract was for 11 months. The station was on the North Slope, well above the Brooks Range, far enough north that for part of the year the sun does not come up at all. They called it a weather monitoring and relay facility. The paperwork called it Station Ardent. The other people who worked there, I would learn, did not call it anything. They just said, "Up here," or "the station," or sometimes, when they thought I wasn't listening, "the box." I flew commercial to Fairbanks. Then a smaller plane to Deadhorse. Then I sat in a hangar that smelled like diesel and burnt coffee for 9 hours waiting for weather, and then a man named Coyle, who would become the closest thing I had to a friend up there, picked me up in a snow vehicle that looked like a shipping container had mated with a tank. Coyle didn't say much on the drive. I remember that the drive was 4 hours and that for the last 2 of them there was no road. Just white, and the headlights, and the GPS unit on the dash that Coyle glanced at maybe twice. He drove like a man who didn't need it. When I asked how he knew where he was going, he said, "You learn the ground." And then, after a while, "The ground doesn't change up here. That's the one good thing about it." I would think about that sentence a great deal later. The ground doesn't change. He meant it as comfort. He was wrong, but I didn't know that yet, and neither, I think, did he. Or maybe he did, and that was the comfort, saying the thing out loud, the way you say a prayer you stopped believing in. The station came up out of the dark like a hell breath. It was lower and longer than I expected, a series of connected modules half buried in drift, with a tower at one end and a helipad at the other and a cluster of instruments on the roof that turned slowly in the wind. There were lights on inside. After 4 hours of nothing, the lights looked obscene, too yellow, too warm, like something the dark would want to put out. Inside it was fluorescent and close and smelled like every institution I have ever been in. The hum of the lights was the first thing I noticed, and the last thing I ever stopped noticing. There is a particular frequency to fluorescent tubes in a place with no other ambient sound, no traffic, no birds, no city, nothing, and it gets into you. By month 3 I could hear it in my sleep. By month 5 I wasn't sure I was hearing it or remembering it. There were 11 of us at Station Ardent when I arrived, counting me. I will not pretend I remember all of them clearly. That is part of what I'm trying to tell you. But the ones that matter. Coyle, who drove me in, who maintained the vehicles and the generators and the physical body of the station. Older, maybe 60, gray and slow and kind in a worn-down way. Vance, the pilot. Younger than me, ex-military, the only person there who seemed to actually like it. He flew the survey helicopter, which I didn't understand at first. Why does a weather station need a helicopter? And which I understood far too well by the end. A woman named Reyes who ran the radio room and the relay. She had been up there longer than anyone, for contracts back to back, almost 4 years. People deferred to her. She had a way of going very still when certain things came up, like an animal that has learned which sounds mean a predator. And the station chief, a man named Brennan, who I met on my second day and who shook my hand and welcomed me and told me, with a smile that did not survive past his cheeks, that the most important thing I would learn up there was the difference between whether we log and whether we don't. I laughed. I thought it was a joke about paperwork. He didn't laugh. He just nodded slow, like I'd passed some small test by being naive enough to laugh, and said, "You'll get it. Everybody gets it." The work, at first, was exactly what they'd advertised. I am going to be honest about how boring it was, because the boredom matters. The boredom is the thing that lets it in. My shift was 12 hours, 6 in the morning to 6 at night, though morning and night were administrative fictions for most of the year. I sat in the data room, which was a long, narrow module lined with monitors, and I logged temperature, surface and at altitude, from the instrument mast and the balloon releases. Barometric pressure. Wind speed and direction. Humidity. Cloud ceiling, when there was light to see it. I cross-referenced our local readings against the satellite feed and the regional models that came in over the relay, and I flagged discrepancies, and I wrote reports, and the reports went out over the relay to somewhere I never saw, some office in some building where presumably someone read them. I had a checklist laminated and taped to the desk. I had a logbook paper, because the rule was everything went in paper first and digital second, in case of equipment loss. I filled the logbook in a tight, cramped hand, and at the end of each week I gave it to Reyes, and she gave me a fresh one. It was repetitive. It was numbing. After the first month I could do most of it without thinking, which is exactly the danger, because when you stop thinking about the work you start thinking about everything else. You start thinking about the divorce. You start thinking about your father. You start thinking about the fact that you are 800 miles from the nearest city and that if something went wrong with your body, an appendix, a heart, anything, you would simply die before help arrived, and everyone here knows that, and nobody talks about it. The cold was a presence. I want to describe the cold properly because people who haven't been in real cold think it's just temperature. It isn't. It's a thing with intent. At 40 below, the air hurts in your lungs. Exposed skin starts to die in minutes. The metal of the station ticked and groaned at night as it contracted. Going outside was a procedure, not a decision. You suited up, you told someone, you took a radio, you did not go alone, ever. That was the first hard rule they gave me. Never go outside alone. I assumed it was about exposure. About falling and freezing. I assumed a lot of things were about exposure. The silence outside was the other thing. When the wind dropped, which it did sometimes, suddenly, completely, the silence was so total that it had a texture. You could stand on the helipad in the dark with the station lights behind you and the snow going out forever in front of you and hear absolutely nothing, not one thing, and it was in those moments, early on, before I knew anything, that I first felt watched. I told myself it was just the human animal's discomfort with open dark space. The lizard part of the brain that wants walls. I told myself that for a long time. The first unusual thing was small, and I almost didn't notice it, and I want to be precise about it because precision is all I have left. It was the 3rd or 4th week. I was logging the overnight readings that the automated system had captured while I slept, transcribing them into the paper log, and I noticed a gap. Between 0200 and 0440 on a particular night, there were no readings. Not 0 readings, no readings. The fields were blank. The automated system had simply not recorded anything for 2 hours and 40 minutes. This wasn't catastrophic. Equipment fails in the cold. But the strange part was the pressure trace on either side of the gap. At 0200, the barometric pressure was normal. At 0440, it was normal. But the slope of the curve going into the gap and coming out of it didn't match. It was as if, during those missing hours, the pressure had done something, gone somewhere, that the system hadn't captured, and then come back to a different place than where it would have ended up if nothing had happened. The line didn't connect. There was a discontinuity. A jump. I'm a meteorologist. Pressure doesn't jump. It can change fast, in a front, but it doesn't teleport. The line is always continuous because the atmosphere is a continuous physical medium. I flagged it. I wrote it up. I brought the printout to Reyes in the radio room. I remember she was drinking tea, and I remember she looked at the printout for a long time, longer than it needed, and then she set down her tea and she said, "What time did you log this gap?" "It's not me logging it. The automated." "What time?" she said. "Did you notice it?" "Just now. About 10 minutes ago." She nodded. She took the printout. She folded it once, neatly, and put it in a drawer, and she said, "Don't enter that in the paper log. It's already in the. Cross it out. Single line, initial it, write sensor fault next to it." She said this the way you tell someone how to fill out a tax form. Board. Procedural. If the automated system shows a gap under 3 hours, it's a sensor fault. You log it as a sensor fault. You don't note the pressure discontinuity. You don't note anything about the curve. Sensor fault. That's it. Is that an official procedure? Because it's not on the. It's the procedure, she said. And then she looked at me, and for just a second the boredom dropped off her face and something else was underneath it, and the something else was tired, and careful, and it scared me more than anger would have, and she said, "You're going to see things up here that don't fit. The job is not to make them fit. The job is to log what we log and not log what we don't. The sooner you stop trying to understand it, the easier your 11 months will be. I'm telling you this because I like you. The last guy who sat in your chair, nobody told him. It went badly for him." I asked what happened to the last guy. She picked her tea back up. "He went home," she said. But she said it the way you'd say it about someone who hadn't. I want to be fair to myself, looking back. I didn't just roll over. I asked questions. I asked Coyle, casually, over dinner, why a weather station needed a helicopter and a pilot on permanent station, and Coyle chewed for a while and then said the helicopter was for verification flights. I asked what we verified. He said, "Ground truth." Which is a real term. It means physically checking a remote-sensed reading against reality, so it didn't alarm me. It should have. The phrase, ground truth, would come to mean something very specific and very terrible to me, but that night it just sounded technical. I asked Vance, the pilot, more directly, because Vance seemed like the type who'd tell you things just to watch your face. I asked him what he actually flew out to look at. He grinned and said, "Storms. You fly into storms?" "Not into. Toward. We fly the perimeter of certain systems, and we take pictures and we come back. Sometimes we drop instruments. Mostly we take pictures." Of what? And here Vance's grin did a thing. It stayed on his mouth but left his eyes, exactly the way Brennan's had, and I would come to recognize this as the station's native expression, the smile that is just a shape the face makes while the person behind it goes somewhere safer. Of weather, Vance said. We take pictures of weather. I let it go. That was the rhythm of those first 2 months. I'd brush up against something wrong, and a hand would gently push me back, and I'd let it go, because letting it go was so much warmer than not letting it go. The station ran on letting things go. It was the actual fuel of the place. 11 people in a metal box in the permanent dark, all of them very, very good at letting things go. The storms have names. All real storms get names now, or at least numbers, classifications, identifiers. The regional models tag every system that meets certain thresholds, and we receive those tags over the relay, and part of my job was to match our local observations to the tag systems coming through the model feed. By the end of the second month, I had noticed that some storms did not get tagged. I want to be careful here. Storms are not discrete objects. The atmosphere is a continuum, and where one system ends and another begins is partly a matter of convention. So when I say some storms weren't tagged, I don't mean a hurricane went unnamed. I mean that there were systems that came across our position, that I observed, that hit our instruments, that I logged in real time before I knew better, that did not exist in the model feed. The satellite showed clear sky. The regional models showed clear sky. And outside my window, the wind was at 60 knots and the snow was going horizontal and the temperature had dropped 18 degrees in 40 minutes. The first time it happened I was certain it was an equipment problem. A storm that big doesn't just not show up on satellite. I ran the diagnostics. The instruments were fine. The satellite feed was fine. I could see other weather on it, real systems, hundreds of miles away, tagged and tracked. It was only this storm, the one physically occurring on top of us, that the rest of the world could not see. I went to log it and I stopped, because I remembered Reyes, and I thought about the pressure discontinuity, and instead of logging it I went to find someone. The radio room was empty. The data from the relay was scrolling on the main monitor. And on the relay log, the record of every transmission in and out of the station, I saw that 14 minutes earlier, Reyes had sent a coded message. It was 3 letters and a timestamp. The 3 letters were ARD, which I knew was our station identifier, and then a string I didn't recognize, and then the word hold. I didn't know what it meant. But I understood, standing there with the storm screaming outside and the relay log glowing in front of me, that the station had a procedure for storms that didn't exist. That this had happened before. That it happened often enough to have a code. I found Reyes in the galley. I didn't mention the relay log. I just said, "There's a system on us. Big one. It's not on the feed." And she said, without looking up, "I know. We're on hold. Stay inside, stay off the outer corridor, and don't log it." And then she said the thing that I think about more than almost anything else from up there. She said, "It'll have a name by morning, or it won't. If it does, log it retroactive. If it doesn't, it didn't happen." The safety procedures were the next thing. There was a drill we ran, irregularly, that they called a containment check. And I'd assumed when I arrived that it was a fire or breach drill, standard stuff for a remote facility. But it wasn't structured like a fire drill. When the containment check was called, a specific tone over the intercom, 2 long, 1 short, everyone went to interior rooms. Not the exits. The interior. We sealed the outer corridor doors, the ones that led toward the airlock and the helipad. We turned off the exterior lights. And then we waited, in the dim interior modules, with the fluorescent hum, until Brennan or Reyes called the all-clear. The first containment check I went through, I asked Coyle what we were containing. He said, "Drafts." Which was absurd, and we both knew it was absurd, and he looked at me when he said it in a way that asked me, please, to accept drafts and move on. So I did. During the containment checks, the rule about exterior lights bothered me the most. If something was out there, a fire, an intruder, a polar bear, anything, you'd want lights. You'd want to see it. turning the lights off only makes sense if the thing you're worried about is attracted to light. Or if it's something you'd rather not see. Or, and this is the one that came to me at 4 in the morning during my 4th or 5th containment check, sitting on the floor of the supply module with my back against a shelf of canned food, if it's something that can see you better when your lights are on than you can see it. I didn't sleep well after that one. The memory problems started around the 3rd month, and they are the hardest part to describe, because by definition I can't fully trust my account of them. It began with small things. I'd log a reading and then find, an hour later, that the reading in the book was different from what I remembered writing, not wildly different, a digit, a decimal. I assumed I'd misremembered. Everyone misremembers. But then there were the conversations. I'd remember talking to someone, Coyle, usually, about something specific, and then it would turn out the conversation hadn't happened, or had happened differently, or had happened with someone else. Once I was certain I'd eaten breakfast with Vance and discussed a film we'd both seen, and Vance, when I referenced it later, looked at me blankly and said he hadn't had breakfast with me in days, and that he'd never seen that film. I started writing things down obsessively. Not just the weather. Everything. A personal journal, separate from the logs. I have it still. It's the only physical thing I took out of there that I'm sure is real, and even it has problems. Pages where my own handwriting changes mid-entry, entries dated days I have no memory of, and one entry, 3 lines, that I do not remember writing, and that is not entirely in English. Part of it is a string of characters that look like letters but aren't, that hurt slightly to look at directly, the way the discontinuity in the pressure curve hurt. I asked Reyes once, carefully, whether people up here had memory trouble. Whether it was the isolation, the dark, the cold. A known thing. She said, yes. Just that. And then, after a moment, write down the things you want to keep. The station will take the rest. It's not personal. It just takes what's nearest the storms. What does that mean, nearest the storms? It means, she said, that the people who do the flights lose the most. Vance doesn't remember his mother's name anymore. He knows he had one. He's got it written on his arm. She pulled up her own sleeve, and on the inside of her forearm, in faded ink that she'd clearly retraced many times, were a few words. A name. A date. The word daughter. We all keep a list, she said. The list is the person. When you stop being able to read the list, that's when you go home. I thought about the last guy. The one who went home. I started keeping a list. I heard the thing outside for the first time during the 4th month. It was during a system that wasn't on the feed. Not a containment check, they didn't always call those, only for the bad ones, just an ordinary unnamed storm, the kind we'd learned to ignore. I was in the data room. The wind was loud. And underneath the wind, irregularly, there was a sound. I want to describe it accurately and not reach for an easy comparison, because the easy comparisons are lies. It was not a roar. It was not a voice. It was not footsteps. It was a low, structured, periodic sound, with a rhythm to it, that came from outside and below, from the direction of the helipad and beyond it, out in the white. It had the quality of machinery, a slow, heavy reciprocating sound, like a vast piston, like something enormous turning over, except that there was no machinery out there. There was nothing out there. The nearest structure of any kind was Dead Horse, 200 miles south. I listened to it for maybe 10 minutes, telling myself it was the wind in the instrument masts, telling myself it was the generators, telling myself it was the metal of the station contracting. None of those were periodic in that way. None of those came from outside and below. And then it stopped, all at once, the way the wind sometimes stopped, and the silence after it was the textured total silence, and into that silence, very faintly, from the relay speaker that should have been quiet, came a fragment of audio. It was a voice. It was reading numbers. The numbers were coordinates. I recognized the format. And the voice was mine. It was my voice, reading coordinates I had never read, in a tone I recognized as my own working voice, the flat-board tone, and it came through the relay speaker for perhaps 4 seconds and then cut off, and I sat absolutely still in the fluorescent hum, and did not move for a very long time. I had not keyed any radio. I had not read any coordinates. But somewhere in the station's systems, or somewhere out in the storm, my voice existed independently of me, doing work I had no memory of doing. I wrote it in my journal. I added a line to my list, my name, my mother's name, the city I was born in, pressing hard with the pen. The impossible weather was the last thing in this phase, and it was the thing that finally broke my ability to let things go. We released weather balloons twice a day, instrument packages that radioed back temperature, pressure, and humidity as they rose, giving us a vertical profile of the atmosphere. It's standard. It's been done for a century. The data is boring and reliable. Air gets colder as you go up, until the tropopause, then it does its thing, all very well understood. During an unnamed storm in the 5th month, I released a balloon and watched the profile come back, and the profile was wrong. Not noisy, not faulted. Wrong in a way that meant something. The temperature dropped normally with altitude, and then at about 4,000 feet it stopped dropping and started rising, which can happen, that's an inversion, that's normal. But it kept rising smoothly, past the surface temperature, past anything reasonable, and at the same time the pressure reading did the thing the discontinuity had done months before. It jumped. The instrument package reported, for several seconds, that it was simultaneously at 4,000 feet and at sea level. That the air around it was both far colder and far warmer than the surrounding air. That it was, in some sense the instrument could measure but I could not understand, in 2 places at once. And then the signal stopped. The balloon was gone. Not burst, gone. The transponder simply ceased, midstream, the way Vance ceases mid-word in the recording I started this whole thing with. I sat with that profile for an hour. I am a person who believes in physics. Physics had been the one stable floor under my feet my whole life, the one thing that did not lie or leave. And the profile in front of me said the floor was not there. Said that inside these storms, the basic rules, that an object is in one place, that pressure is continuous, that temperature has a gradient, were suggestions the storm chose not to follow. I took the profile to Brennan. Not Reyes. Brennan. I decided I needed to talk to whoever was actually in charge, and I walked into his office without knocking and put the printout on his desk and I said, I need someone to tell me what we are actually doing here. Because that is not weather. That has never been weather. And I think everyone here knows it. Brennan looked at the printout. He looked at me. And for the first time since I'd arrived, the smile didn't even start. His face just stayed where it was, gray and old and very tired, and he said, Sit down. I sat down. You're right, he said. It's not weather. Not the way you mean. But it comes the way weather comes, and it can be tracked the way weather is tracked, and the people who set this place up a long time ago decided that the most useful lie to tell about it was that it's weather. Because the alternative is that there's no procedure for it. And people can't live next to a thing that has no procedure. The procedure is the only thing keeping any of us sane. So we call it weather. We log the ones that behave and we don't log the ones that don't. Do you understand? No, I said. Good, he said. The ones who understand are the ones we send home. The storm that should not have existed announced itself 11 days into the 6th month. And the first sign of it was that the regional model lost its mind. I'd grown used to unnamed storms being invisible on the feed, clear satellite, clear model, real weather outside. This was the opposite. The model began predicting a system that wasn't there. The satellite showed clear sky and our instruments showed calm, but the regional model, the big computational forecast that synthesized data from 1,000 sources, kept generating a massive low-pressure system centered exactly on our position and moving nowhere. Just sitting on us. A storm in the math that wasn't yet in the world. I'd never seen that. I asked Reyes if she had. She went still, the animal stillness, and she said, Once. My first contract. And she wouldn't say more, except, as she left the room, almost to herself. It got here 3 days after the model. We've got time. Not much. The mood of the station changed in those 3 days, and the change was not panic. I keep coming back to that because it's the part that violates every expectation. There was no panic. There was a kind of settling, a quieting, a withdrawal. People got slower and more careful with their movements. Conversations dropped to the functional minimum. Coyle went around checking and rechecking the physical seals on every outer door, methodical, unhurried, the way you'd prepare a body. Vance spent hours in the helicopter doing maintenance, and when I passed the open hangar I saw him sitting in the cockpit not working, just sitting, his hands on the controls, staring out at the dark, and on the back of his neck where his collar gapped I could see fresh ink, new words added to whatever list he kept on his skin. I added to mine. I was up to half a page. I'd started including things I was afraid I'd doubt later, that the storms were real, that I was right to be afraid, that Brennan had confirmed it wasn't weather. I wrote, the profile was in 2 places at once. You saw it. This is real. The equipment began to fail in specific ways. Not breaking, failing toward a pattern. The clocks were the first. Every clock in the station was synchronized to the same master signal, and over those 3 days they began to drift, but they didn't drift randomly. They drifted toward each other and then passed, the digital ones flickering between numbers, and once, for about a minute, every clock in the station read the same impossible time, a time that doesn't exist, the hour and minute field showing values higher than they're supposed to go. I have a photo of one of the readouts. I look at it sometimes. The number isn't important. What's important is that I took the photo and that the photo is real and that therefore the readout was real. The radar was next. Our primary radar swept the surrounding airspace and painted precipitation. As the storm in the math drew closer to becoming a storm in the world, the radar began painting returns from the ground. Not weather, ground. Solid returns, at 0 altitude, in places where the survey said there was nothing but tundra and snow. And the returns had structure. Edges. Right angles. They appeared in a cluster about 11 nautical miles north-northwest of the station, and they were exactly where, weeks later, the helicopter would fly, and exactly where, on my recording, Vance would stop talking. I showed the radar returns to Reyes. I expected the stillness. Instead, she did something worse. She looked at the screen, and she sighed, a long, exhausted sigh, the sigh of someone seeing an old enemy, and she said, "It's building again." She keyed the relay. She sent ARD, and the string, and then a different word than hold. She sent the word verify. "What does verify mean?" I asked. She didn't look at me. "It means," she said, "that the helicopter goes up. I want to slow down here, because this is where the floor really goes, and I owe it to you to walk it carefully." The hidden records I found 2 days before the flight. I found them because I was looking for the previous, verify, events. I'd become obsessed with understanding what we were about to do, and because Reyes, I think, let me find them. The relay archive was supposedly purged on a rolling basis, but there was a local cache, and Brennan's access wasn't as locked down as it should have been, and I am not proud of this, but I went into his office while he slept and I read. The station was not built in my lifetime. It predates the modern facility by decades. The current modules were bolted onto something older, and the something older had a different name and a different purpose, and the purpose was not, and had never been, meteorology. The earliest records I could read described it as an observation post. Not for weather. For recurrence events. That was the term, used over and over, dry and bureaucratic, recurrence events. The storms were recurrence events. They recurred. They came on a schedule that wasn't regular but wasn't random either, a schedule the station existed to track, and each recurrence event was logged with a location, a duration, and a column I didn't understand at first, headed losses. The losses column had names in it. Personnel. Each recurrence event, going back decades, had cost the station people, not always, but often, 1 or 2, sometimes more. And the way they were lost was recorded in a final column, abbreviated, and the abbreviations were things like W/O, which I think meant walked out, into the storm, and N/R, not returned, used for flights, and one, used several times, that was just a single character I won't reproduce because it's one of the characters from my own journal entry, the ones that hurt to look at, and seeing it there. In an official record decades old, in the same impossible alphabet that had appeared in my own handwriting in a journal I didn't remember writing, that was the moment, if there was one single moment, that I understood I was not going to leave this place the way I came. The records also explained the structures. Sort of. They didn't explain what they were. They explained the rule about them, and the rule was this: the structures appear during major recurrence events, in the location of the radar returns, and they are visible from the air but not from the ground, and they are not to be approached, and they are not to be recorded, and the helicopter's job, the only job the helicopter ever had, was to fly to them, confirm their presence, photograph them, and leave. To establish ground truth. To verify that the recurrence was real and not just in the math. And then to come back and tell no one and log nothing, because the structures were the thing the station had been built to watch for, the thing inside the storms, the thing that the lie about weather existed to contain. Verification, the records said, was mandatory because the station's continued funding and existence depended on confirmed observations. Someone, somewhere, in some office I would never see, needed to know each time it came back. The whole apparatus, the 11 of us, the helicopter, the relay, the 4-hour drive, the fluorescent hum, the cold, all of it existed to send a single message to that office, again and again across the decades: it's here again. It came back again. Still watching. I closed the records. I went back to my bunk. I added one line to my list, the last calm line I would ever write in it. I know what the flight is for now. I am going anyway. I don't know why I'm going anyway. I went on the flight because Vance asked me to, and because by then I think I needed to see it, the way you need to look at the thing under the bandage even though looking won't help. The reason given was operational. Verification flights required a second observer, and the regular second, a quiet man named Osei whom I've barely mentioned because he barely spoke, had stopped being able to read his list. I'd watched it happen over those final days. He'd hold his arm up to the light and move his lips and nothing would come, and his face would go slack and patient and empty. And on the morning of the flight he was sitting in the galley smiling gently at nothing, and Reyes was feeding him because he'd forgotten how, and Brennan said, "He goes home on the next supply run." And nobody believed it, and the smiling man in the galley least of all, because he didn't believe anything anymore. So I went up in Osei's seat. The storm had arrived in the world by then. It had a body. It was the largest system I ever saw up there, and it did not behave like a storm. It had an edge, a hard defined edge, like a wall, like the storm was a room you could step into, and inside the edge the snow didn't fall so much as hang, suspended, moving in patterns that the wind alone couldn't explain. We flew the perimeter the way the procedure required, Vance calm and professional, calling elevation, and me in the second seat reading the instruments, and for a while it was almost ordinary, almost just a job, 2 men in a loud machine over a white nothing. The instruments inside the storm did what the balloon profile had done. Altitude readings doubled and split. The compass turned slowly and continuously, all the way around, again and again, as if we were the still point and the entire planet's magnetic field was rotating around us. The radio altimeter, which bounces a signal off the ground to tell you your height, began reporting that the ground was rising toward us, 1,100 feet, 900, 600, even though visually the snow was just as far below as ever, and Vance was holding altitude steady on the barometric. The ground was coming up to meet us in the math while staying still in the world. It was the model storm and the real storm again, 2 states at once, and we were flying through the scene between them. And then we came over the structures. I have tried for years to describe them and I fail every time, and I've come to believe the failure is the truth of them, that they are made to defeat description, that describing them is exactly the thing the station's whole apparatus of lies exists to prevent. So I'll tell you only what I'm sure of. They were dark. They were large, larger than the station, larger than anything that should be on that tundra. They had geometry, and the geometry was regular, repeating, which is the signature of intent, of building, of mind, but the repetitions didn't resolve. Looking at them was like looking at a word you've said too many times until it stops being a word. The longer I looked, the less I could hold the shape, and the more certain I became that the shape was holding me, that the structures were not objects we were observing but a process that was, very slowly, in a way I could feel in my teeth and my chest, observing us back. There was no movement that I could point to. And yet the entire cluster had the quality of something mid-motion, something caught between one configuration and another, a slow heavy reciprocation, and I realized, hanging in that seat 1,100 feet up, that this was the sound. This was the source of the low periodic sound I'd heard from the data room months before, the vast piston, the thing turning over. I was looking at the sound. It had been here, doing this, in the place the ground survey said was empty, this whole time. It was not new. The records went back decades. It was older than the records. It came back not because it left but because we, briefly, periodically, became able to see what never went away. That was when Vance stopped talking. I have the recording. You know this part. He got as far as desk, and then nothing, and I kept reading instruments, and then I stopped reading instruments, and I said his name, and I said the thing about seeing it too, and he didn't answer, and what the recording doesn't capture is that when I turned to look at him, Vance was flying the helicopter perfectly, hands steady, eyes forward, completely competent and completely absent, his face wearing the station's native expression. The smile that's just a shape, except now there was no smile, just the absence the smile had always been hiding, and his lips were moving, and what he was saying, silently, over and over, I could read on his mouth, and it was coordinates. He was reading coordinates. In the flat-board working voice that didn't make any sound. The same coordinates, I would realize later, that had come out of the relay speaker months before in my own voice. We all read them eventually. The structures give everyone the same numbers. I don't know what the numbers are the coordinates of. I have a terrible feeling they're the coordinates of us. I don't remember the flight back. That's not a literary device. There is a hole. The recording ends, the cockpit recorder also has a gap, the same gap, the audio's simply absent, and my memory has the same hole in the same place, and the next thing I have is being back in the station, in the galley, and Reyes putting a cup of something hot in my hands, and Brennan asking me, gently, what I saw. And I told him. Nothing. The weather was too thick. We couldn't verify. I don't know why I said it. It wasn't true. But it came out of me smooth and easy, the station's lie speaking itself through me, and Brennan nodded slowly, and I understood from his face that he knew it wasn't true, and that the lie was the correct answer anyway, that we couldn't verify was a sacrament, a thing you say to make the procedure hold, and that by saying it I had finally, fully, become one of them. Vance never spoke again in any way I'd call speaking. He performed his duties. He smiled the shape. 3 weeks later he walked out onto the helipad during a calm, clear night, without a suit, without telling anyone, and the camera over the airlock recorded him walking out across the snow toward the north-northwest in a straight line, unhurried, until he was past the lights, and then there was just the dark, and in the morning the log said the helicopter had not flown and that all personnel were accounted for. And his bunk was empty and made, and on the wall above it, scratched into the metal, with something hard, were a few words that I think had been his list, except now they were in the alphabet that hurts, and none of us could read them, and after a day or two none of us could remember whose bunk it had been. I had to check my own journal to know his name was Vance. The storm passed. That's the thing nobody warns you about, that after all of it, the storm just passes, the way storms do. The hard edge moved off to the south and dissolved, the suspended snow began to fall normally. The radar stopped painting structures, the clocks resynchronized, the model forgot it had ever predicted anything. Within 48 hours the instruments were boring again. Temperature, pressure, wind, humidity. The numbers behaved. The floor of physics slid quietly back under my feet as if it had never gone anywhere, and that was almost the worst part, the way the world closed back over the wound without a scar. The records disappeared. The local cache I'd read in Brennan's office was empty when I looked again, not deleted, empty, the way the readings had been blank during that first discontinuity, The data not removed but simply never there. The relay archive of the Verify event was gone. The radar logs of the structures were gone. The cockpit recording was gone from the station's systems, and I only have my 31 seconds because, in the part of the flight back that I don't remember, I apparently copied it to a personal drive, an act I have no memory of performing, with hands that maybe weren't entirely deciding things for themselves anymore. There was no official acknowledgement that anything had happened. No report went out that said it came back again. Or maybe one did, in the part of the relay log I wasn't allowed to see, in the alphabet that hurts, to the office I'll never know the location of. The recurrence event recurred, and was observed, and was not recorded, exactly as the station had been built to ensure, and the only evidence it left in the official world was an absence, a gap in the data, a sensor fault, a flight that never flew. I finished my contract. That surprised me. I'd assumed, after the flight, that I was finished, that I'd end up like Osei smiling in the galley or like Vance walking north, but I didn't. I served out the 11 months. I think now that the station kept me intact on purpose, the way you might spare one witness, that the structures took what they took from me on that flight, the missing hours, whatever lived in those hours, and decided it was enough, and let the rest of me go home to be a different kind of record. A walking one. A list with legs. Because here is what I have to tell you, and it's the reason I'm telling you any of this. I checked my list the morning the supply run came to take me out. Half a page, written hard in my own hand over 11 months. My name. My mother's name. The city I was born in. The profile in 2 places at once. The flight. Vance. And I could read all of it. Every line. Except I noticed, and I noticed it the way Reyes had noticed things, with the animal stillness, that I had no memory of the events behind half the lines. I could read. The profile was in 2 places at once, and I knew it was true the way I know the sky is up, but the actual seeing of it, the hour I'd sat with that printout, was gone, replaced by the line about it. The list wasn't keeping my memories. The list had become my memories. Somewhere up there I had quietly crossed the line Reyes warned me about. When you stop being able to read the list, you go home. Except in my case the list still read fine. It was the person behind it that had gone home early and left the list to finish the contract. I drove out with Coyle. 4 hours. No road for the last 2. He didn't say much. Near the end, where the lights of Dead Horse came up out of the dark, he said, "You did all right up there." And then, after a while, the only true thing anyone said to me the entire 11 months. "You won't remember it the way it happened. None of us do. That's not the cold, and it's not the dark. That's the kindness. That's the only kindness the place has got." And then he said, "The ground doesn't change up here." And this time I heard it for what it was. Not comfort. A warning. The ground doesn't change, but everything that can see the ground does, and the place where the structures stand has been empty in every survey for 40 years, and that emptiness is not absence. It's patience. I've moved 4 times since. The wind finds me. I told you that at the start, and you maybe thought it was a way of speaking. It isn't. 3 times now, in 3 different states, far from any storm, I have heard the low periodic sound, the vast slow reciprocation, the thing turning over, coming from somewhere outside and below, at hours when there is no machinery and no wind, and each time I have gone to my window and looked out at whatever ordinary darkness is out there, a parking lot, a desert, a quiet street, and seen nothing. And understood that nothing is exactly what the ground survey would show. I still have the list. I've added to it over the years, trying to hold on to the parts of myself the station didn't take, and I've started to notice that the early lines, the ones from up there, are changing. Not the words. The handwriting. The most recent time I read my list, the line about Vance was in a hand that wasn't mine, and the line under it, a line I am certain I never wrote, was 3 characters long, in the alphabet that hurts to look at, and I could not read it, and I sat there a long time trying, and the longer I tried the more certain I became that I was very close to being able to, that one more recurrence, one more night of the sound at the window. And the letters would resolve, and I would understand them, and I would stand up, and I would walk outside without a coat, in a straight line, toward the north-northwest, unhurried, until I was past the lights. I play the 31 seconds when I need to remember it's real. Vance and the rotors, and my own young voice reading coordinates, and desk, and then him going silent, and me saying, "Tell me you're seeing this too. Tell me you're seeing this too." I've started to think I wasn't talking to Vance. I've started to think I was talking to whoever would eventually be listening to the recording. To you. Across all the years, from the seat next to a man who'd already stopped being a man, in a machine over a place that isn't on any map, I think I was already asking the only question that ever mattered up there, the question the whole station was built to never have to answer, the question I'm asking you now, quietly, at the end, with nothing left to add and no one coming to call the all clear. You're seeing this too. Right. Tell me you're seeing this too.